Hey everyone, thanks for joining today. I'm Dylan. I'm a solutions architect here at Decisions. So throughout this meeting, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, raise your hand, and I'll get to them. So I see we do have one pre-submitted questions, and that question is, I am using a text box to allow user number value. The reason I'm not using a number box is because of validation issues. Is there a way to format a string on a report so that you get the number value with all of the zeros? So unfortunately, there's not an easy way to do that. You have a couple of options with it. So one option being that you have to do some sort of manipulation to the text. Since it's string, unfortunately, you don't get any of the out of the box number formatting. But what you could do with that is have an inline field, flow inline field, which would manipulate that text. That's highly not recommended because what happens there is it runs a flow for every line on your report. So my suggestion here is when you save the data, you can do a conversion to convert that string into an integer or decimal and save it onto your data type in that format. It'll make things a lot cleaner in the long run and a lot easier to work with on the report. So that would probably be the best way. There could be, if you need to save it as a string, I would then save it with the zeros or the trailing zeros or leading zeros, whichever format you'd want. It's just that there's not an easy way to really manipulate a string on a report like that. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't believe you're on the call. Okay, but we can go on to the next one. So is there any questions from anyone? If not, we can kind of go into, we can demo a couple different things. So I'm not seeing any questions, so I guess we can jump right into a demo. If any questions come up throughout this demo relating to it or anything else, feel free, just drop them in the chat, speak up, I'll get to that question as soon as I can. Okay, so let's go over how to build a mixed repeater in Decisions. So first, I'm going to take you guys to the documentation site so you can kind of see, follow along. I'm going to venture off from what the documentation is showing, kind of show it in a different sort of format, but I will drop this into the chat so everyone can reference it. But really, a mixed repeater is used when you want have a form that's basically going to be used as a questionnaire. You have different types of data, different questions you would want to ask a user, and each of the data types are different. So let's say you have you want to get the user's birthday, you need a date time picker for that. If you want the user's name, you need a text box. If you want them to select something particular, you can put a drop down. These would all be accomplished through a mixed repeater. So the setup could be a little confusing. So if any questions come up, just please ask, but I'll kind of go through this slowly. So the first thing we're going to need to do is with a mixed repeater, for each repeater you're going to build, whether that be like a text box repeater, a date time repeater, a drop down, you're going to need to have a data structure. You can have it, the data saved, or you can have a flow structure that will hold your data for the mixed repeater. So we're going to build a couple here. We're going to do a string, so a text box, a Boolean checkbox, and a date time. And I'll walk you guys through those three. So we're just going to do flow structures because we don't need to save the data. This is really just for demo purposes. So let's build our first flow structure. We call it lunch and learn string control. And on here, you put a couple values. So in this case, it's a questionnaire. I'm going to put the question that I want to ask, and I'm going to put the data, which is whatever the response to the question would be. So this structure here will be used for my string control. So once this saves, I'll go on to build the next one. Okay, so I have a string control built. So the next one I'm going to build. Sorry that everything's run kind of slow. I haven't cleaned up my local in a while. So the next one we're going to build is a date time control. Go ahead and start typing. Bunch and learn. Date time control. And once again, we're going to put our question field, which would be the question that we ask for the date. In this case, whatever statement you want to place before it, whether it's your birthday, a date, some significant date, you just fill that out. And we're going to put the data, which in this case, it's not going to be a string. It's going to be a date time that the user enters. Let's save this one. I think for the sake of this loading very slowly, we might just stick with these two, but it will be the same process to add other controls. So let's now go into creating a form. Things should speed up once that new structure compiles for us. We're going to create a new one. Let's go create a form. I'm going to call this the lunch and learn mixed repeater form. So like the start of most forms when you build it, you're going to want to put a button to really drive what happens. We'll just click save in this case. We're going to clean up our grid so that it solely displays our mixed repeater. And now we're going to drag that mixed repeater component out. So with any component, you give it a name. So we'll just call this mixed repeater data. And what happens now is this is just a blank component on the form. What we need to do now is really build the sources and add them to this. So this is just a demo, Joshua. There was no questions earlier. If you have one, feel free to ask. I can switch over to that one.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't know what the best way to ask was. So I have an entity, and as part of the entity, I have probably not the right thing to have, but it was built out as a simple flow structure. And now I'm trying to build a report that has the values of that simple flow structure within it.
Okay.
And all I'm getting is a serialized value. And I think I get an error that says when I'm building the entity, it says about something like you'll get the serialized value. So first of all, is there a way to get those values out in a report? And if there's not, then what do I need to change in order to be able to extract them in a report? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, good question. So when saving complex objects onto an entity, it gets serialized in the database. So what would have to happen is kind of I think the better approach to it would be to take that field and put an ID on it and then build your flow structure separate from the entity and then relate it by that ID. So to report on it, you would build a relationship and then you can join the records and have all of the values on your report.
One second.
Yeah, no problem. And I can kind of do an example of that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So what I would recommend for that is because it's in that serialized structure, there's not going to be a clean way to display it on that report.
Okay.
You would want to move that simple database structure or put it into, if it's a flow structure, create a database structure for it, and then
Okay.
relate the entity by its ID. So you can put on your entity the ID of whatever the database structure you have, that object you just created, and then do a relationship and join it so that you can report on it that way. If you want, I can walk through an example of what that would look like.
Yeah, that would be great. That way I know how to make the relationship
Okay.
inside and show it on the report. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's go with an entity. Let's see, let's hope this goes a little quicker. Let's go lunch and learn. Let's do one. We're just gonna have just gonna do a simple join. So let's do first. Actually, let's just do a name, and then let's do an account ID. And this way I can just kind of show how to join to the account. So let's just put a first name field here. To make things simpler, I'm just gonna put these actions so I can create an entity real quick. Might take a little bit to, my local's been running a little slow today. Okay, so now I think we just gotta wait for it to compile. Might take a couple seconds. But in the meantime, let me go get an account ID that I can use. I can show how to do the relationship. So I'm just gonna copy this because this is what we're gonna want to relate to. Once this loads back up, we're now going to add an entity in this folder. Add user defined lunch and learn entity one, test entity. So I'm going to put the account ID that we just created. So this would represent if you move your structure to a database structure, you'd get an ID when you create that record, and then you could tie it back to your entity this way. And I'll just put first name is Dylan. So we're going to save this. So now to report, I'll just show a couple things. Let's build a report. See how long it takes to search. I just have to go into it. Lunch and learn entity. So right now we could see we have my name and then we have the account ID field. So what we need to do now is create our relationship to the account table. In your case, it would be whatever your database structure is. To do that, we can go here to create a database and we're going to add a relationship. So this is going to be to account. So then you could choose your connection. So this would also work creating relationships. Let me see. Don't know why it's not loading, but let's see, what is it doing? Might need to do it in another location. Let's see. Don't know why that validation's not going away. let's see, I think there's another place we can do it at since my local doesn't want to work properly today. Go to integrations.
Should be LNL entity 1 that you put in?
Yeah, so this would be, I'm just gonna try it here. Let's see. Okay, so this is what I want to do. I think I was adding the wrong thing. So you would create your relationship now. So I'm just gonna call this lunch and learn entity to account. I don't know why my thing is not working properly, but you would choose your table. So this case, it would be our lunch and learn entity, and we want to connect it to the table, the account table. I believe accounts are just entity account. For some reason, my local, maybe I have to recompile the structures. I think it might just be frozen. But what would happen normally, if my local is working properly, you'd have ID fields populate under this, and you would say, I want to move things from, I want to relate this entity table from this ID to my account table by this ID. Let me see if I recompile structures, if I can get it to work as I'm wanting. I just need to refresh. All structures up to date. Well, then let me just refresh. Okay, let's see if it wants to work a little bit better now. You know what, I'm just gonna go back to where we are. Sorry for going back and forth. Let's go to integrations, database, local connection, add a relationship. Let's hope this goes away now. There we go. Now it's gonna work as I hope. So we're gonna choose our lunch and learn entity. And you see now we choose the field here. So I want to choose my account ID and I want to relate it to my entity. I think it's entity account. That's the account table and decisions. And I want to relate that to the account ID. So now we just created the relationship, save this. On our report, we can kind of see we don't have any of the account fields, but now if we add a relatable table, which is entity account, we can now see all of the account fields to add onto this report. So let me just go to one we know, email address. So now you can see, you could populate this row of the report with all the data from that table.
Okay, I got it. And so then I should then, if I want to reassert, sort of, I would build a flow that would loop through all of the flow entities or whatever they are, and then build, create a parallel entity for it as a database entity and link that up to the, whatever it's linked to, right? So that I could do that, and then I could transfer everything over.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the approach I
Okay.
would take. I would fetch all of the entities for each one, then I would move
Right.
exactly like you said, create that structure, tie it back with the ID. And then
Okay.
once it's all moved over, then you could update your structure to remove that object.
Right. Right.
But yeah,
Okay.
this would be the approach I take to it.
Okay, and then I would, but once I build the link, the link, even if it has the same name, I would still need to reassociate everywhere in my flows with the new one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, no problem. So it's sometimes useful with putting objects onto entities and with working with the data in a flow because you can pull it. The downfall is like when you come across with reporting, it just shows that serialized version of it.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. So are there any other questions? If not, we still have a couple of minutes left, so I can go back into the mixed repeater example and kind of finish that up. So let's go here. So we have our mixed repeater control, and what we need to do is add sources to it now. So since we created two sort of objects so far, we have one for a string, one for a date time. We need to create our controls for them. So let's create a new one, user defined control. Call this lunch and learn string box. So we're gonna put two things on here. We're gonna put a label, which is going to work as our question, and we're gonna put a text box where the user can fill out the data. So good thing about this user control is you can style it just like a form. You can put CSS on it, make it look nicer, really format it to what style you're looking for. For now, I'm just gonna leave it really basic. So with label, we're gonna choose to get text. Actually, before we do that, let's set our input. Our input is going to be the object we created for this. So we're gonna say lunch and learn string box. I don't remember exactly. So lunch and learn string control. That's gonna be our input to this. So our label is going to be populated from our string box question because that's what we want to appear. And the data the user fills out is going to be what populates the data field on our object. Outcome scenarios, I just put as optional. There is no outcome scenario on this. It would be on the form itself. So let's save this and then build one for the date time real quick. So this is our first source. Now we're going to add one. Lunch and learn control. And on here, we're going to follow the same pattern that I just showed. You're going to set your input. Put our label here, which will be our question. Then we're going to put our date time picker here, which will be what populates our data. Here, we just need to set this to be optional. We're going to clean this up a little, remove this bottom row. So now we have our date time control. So now that we have our two sources that we're going to use, and this could be really infinite amount of sources. It could be really however many controls you build and really the data that's going to drive your form. So just for this example, it's these two. So let's close this. And now let's build a flow where we could run this form. So the input to this flow, we're going to make just for these purposes, just inputs of list for each of the types. So we're going to say on our string control. Now we're going to do we're going to make these list because we're just going to, when we debug it, populate these. Now within your workflow, you would really populate these structures based off of however you're getting your questions stored. Most of the time, you would have a database table that has the questions pre-populated or something else you're referencing. You could always do it at runtime. The use cases I've come across have been more pull from this table and reference it that way. So the next thing we need to do is drag our form into here. So we're going to pick an existing, a recent, and our mixed repeater. So you can see here that our input is looking for a list of objects. So that's one thing so that it could be dynamic because each control is going to require different data. So to pass in a list of objects, what I like to do is just do add items to list. Use this step. Set the list type to object. see. Where's just object at? Why isn't it letting me do that this time? Or you could just honestly build it here too. So we're just gonna do this for now. We're gonna join arrays because we have two lists we want to do. Our first list being our string control list. Second list being our date time control list. So now what it's gonna do is take whatever we have on the input, whatever we set when we just debug it, and it's gonna format it into its respective control. So let's just debug this. We're going to build a couple of things. So for a date time, we're just going to put birth date. And then for let's do another one. Let's just do today's date. Or let's do current date. And then we could do first name string, and we'll do last name. So let's debug this. And now you can see that we have the first name and last name appear as text boxes, and then our birth date and current date appear as these date time pickers. So these lists can just keep growing and it'll all show up on the form, but this is really how you can build dynamic forms that aren't such static, especially if your data is going to change in the questions, just like a questionnaire. So the next part is really processing the output of this data. So I'll just show you how it comes out. I'm not going to go through exactly the entire process because it could be a little bit of work, but I'll just show you what the data looks like being passed out. So what happens is the output is just a list of generic objects now. Because we took in a list of generic objects, it knew on the control itself what to show. Now it's just going to pass out the data as a list of objects again. So there's a couple of ways to process this output list. One way is to do a for each loop on it, and then you try to cast the object to a type. So this would then be our type that we created. So our string box control and our date time control. So you can use the step cast object to type to cast it to that to get it back into a workable object to then perform your processing on later on with that data, whether you save it, use it for other evaluations. You have all of that data then available to you. So I know that was a little quick. So are there any questions on that? I don't see any coming in. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to just shoot an email to us. We'll be happy to take a look. I believe this recording will be available afterwards if you guys ever need to reference it. But I think we're out of time. So if there's no more questions, I think we can call it a day. Thanks for joining, everyone.